Shane was one of the not only supporters, but helped to fund this event. And I'm sorry I didn't mention it earlier. And actually, I had the honor to be with Milton in South Africa a few months ago, and it was still, I would say, in the planning stages, and Milton was very gracious and supportive and helpful, so thank you. And appreciative of your help, and happy to see you here. So thank you. So this afternoon we're in for a treat. Bassam Tibi is going to be speaking. The title of his keynote address is the Islamization of Antisemitism. Bassam is a professor of international relations at the University of Goettingen in Germany, and where he's a professor of international relations, and he's the director of the Center for International Affairs. He previously held more than 18 visiting professorships on 4 continents, and has lectured at more than 35 universities on 5 continents in his career. He held appointments at Princeton, Harvard, Yale, Georgetown, and UC Berkeley, and that's just in the United States. And if I would speak to you about the other positions he's held internationally, I would take all this time from him. He was educated at the Johann Wolfgang Goethe University of Frankfurt, and also at the University of Hamburg. He's the author of more than 27 books in German and more than 8 books actually in English. He's published more than 300 articles, academic articles, just in academic journals. His focus of his research is international relations, Islamic migration to Europe, and is also an expert, as you'll soon hear, on issues of jihadism and the irregular war and religious fundamentalism within political Islam. And not only is it a great honor to introduce Bassam to you here this afternoon, but Bassam was actually our first visiting professor, scholar, when YIISA was just getting off the ground. And he's really, I know he has many friends here, but he's really a special friend to us at YIISA and at Yale, so it's really an honor that Bassam came all the way to be here with us this afternoon.
Charles and I met 2006 in Jerusalem at the Hebrew University in an event of the Sassoon Center for Antisemitism. Within 5 minutes, we found out the chemistry works, and after 10 minutes, we found out so many intellectual commonalities. And in a short period, we became friends. And a year after, he brought me to Yale to lecture, and then my last sabbatical, I'm retired since last year, and I spent my last sabbatical year at YIISA, and that was most gratifying, and I'm very pleased to be back here. Yeah? I was born in the Middle East, and you know, in the Middle East they say 2 o'clock and they mean 3, it could be also 4. In Germany, I always say in America, the chairperson are very tough. They care for the time. After 15 minutes, they pass you the first sheet of paper. You still have 5 minutes. But we are here a little bit in the Middle East, yeah? So we are operating in Middle Eastern time. It's now, I was supposed to begin 2 to 10. It's now 7 after. But please bear with me that I want to have the 30 minutes assigned to me. It's now 7 after, and I will stop sharp 2:37. I was for 10 years a television commentator in ZDF. This is the major channel in Germany, and they say you can talk as long as you want, but when the 3 minutes are over, we take the camera out. So I stop by myself. I have 4 messages, and I'm going to elaborate on these messages within the next 30 minutes. The first message is that Islamism, not Islam, Islamism is the most recent source of a variety of anti-Semitism, and I argue that this variety of anti-Semitism is worst among the existing ones in Germany. I live in the world. I live in Germany. We have in Germany neo-Nazis. They are dangerous, but I believe that the neo-Nazis do not have the courage to do what some Islamists do in Germany. For instance, 6 weeks ago, there was a cultural festival in the city of Hanover, and neo-Nazis didn't like it, that there was an Israeli group there to feature. It's about art, no politics. Yeah? But Islamist groups succeeded in stopping the show and coercing the program director, and the Israeli group was asked to leave the stage, and they continued without it.
They threw stones at them. It was a couple of kids.
Even that. I want to be. And they threw stones on them, and there was if neo-Nazis did this, they would be in jail, and the guys who did it are not in jail, and in my understanding, there's no trial ongoing. So this is you see. In Germany, I assure you, that, I'm afraid in Germany of neo-Nazis and Islamists, but I'm more afraid of Islamists. So, and this is an indication they are very dangerous, they have to be taken seriously. The second message, this is the first message, Islamism is the major source of contemporary anti-Semitism. There's a term, the new anti-Semitism, but it's not specified. There are varieties of anti-Semitism with S in plural, but the Islamist one is the most dangerous among them, and it has to be taken very seriously. The message number 2, to make such a statement, it's dangerous today, even in the United States, in writing or in speaking. And you, once you finish saying this message or passing this message, you will be accused of Islamophobia, of hurting the faith of Muslims, of offending Muslims, of even being racist, and most people shut up, or even they do not open their mouth because they're afraid of being accused this way. The least accusation is the accusation of Orientalism. Since I'm not only a Muslim, but I mean, if you look at the history of Damascus, the classical history of Damascus, 800 pages, Mukhtarat, Tawarikh Dimashq, selective history of Damascus. On page 650, about on one page, there's a big chapter about the famous 17 families of Damascus, and one of them is my family, and the chapter says the leading scholars in Islam, the highest authority in Islam is Qadi, is the judge, and Mufti is the one who issues a fitwa. And fitwa is not a death sentence, as American newspapers or also European papers write. Fitwa is a legal counseling or legal judgment, but it's not. It has an advice. A verdict can only be done by a Qadi, but a counseling, reasoning, it's done by a Mufti. And the Muftis and the Qadis of Damascus, all of them, the leading ones, from the 13th to the 19th century, they were my ancestors. Yeah? And there is, in the house of my parents in Damascus, there's a big tree which follows the traces, genealogical traces, or the lineage of my family. And the claim is it goes back to the Prophet. Many families do that. I'm a scholar, so I do not believe in all these things, but the claim is there, and it is established in textbooks. Yeah? So no one can accuse me of Islam bashing or Islamophobia. When it comes to Orientalism, I come from the Orient, but there is a term invented here in the United States, self-orientalization. So my contenders say Mr. Tibi is, well, behind closed door, they say he's the toy of the Jews. But when they speak in public, they say, I am a victim of self-orientalization. There is a need to avoid this offense or this accusation, and to do so, you have to make a distinction between Islam and Islamism. So you say, we are not talking about the religion of Islam, we are talking about Islamism. And I'm going to elaborate on this distinction later on. This is the message 2, is the danger or the risk combined with talking freely and as a scholar in terms of truth about the subject. The third message is you have to make a distinction when you talk about anti-Semitism in the Middle East. You have to make a distinction between pan-Arab anti-Semitism or pan-Arab nationalist anti-Semitism, and this is barely done in the literature, even in the academic literature. And it is not only an academic distinction, it's a real distinction, and it is also consequential. So there were two stages of anti-Semitism in the Middle East. Yeah? One is by secular Arab nationalism or pan-Arab nationalism, and one is by Islamism. And I'm gonna elaborate on this distinction. From my friend and colleague Jeffrey Herf, who wrote a wonderful book about Nazi propaganda in Yale, I learned, you see, as a scholar, you have always to modify and check your ideas. And I have been working on this for more than 30 years, but in communication with Jack Herf and learning from his work, I learned there has been a conflation. I tried in my work to separate both, well, for analytical reasons, but also in the reality, because if you are secular, you cannot be Islamist. And the Islamists are very, very hostile to Arab nationalists. They are, you know, there's a journal by a professor with whom I worked, an Israeli professor. His name is Hillel Fresh, and we published a book about Islamism. And now there's a journal. He wrote an article, "The Islamization of Arab Nationalism." There's no such thing, because Arab nationalism is secular and Islamism is religious, and they are enemies. But there has been a conflation, and this is documented in the work of Jeffrey Herf, in the persons of Hassan al-Banna, the founder of Islamism, and the Mufti of Jerusalem. The Mufti of Jerusalem was a religious authority, but he was a nationalist, and his worldview was nationalist. He was not an Islamist, but both worked closely with another, were related, and so there is a conflation. And this conflation is documented in something that I didn't know before, and this is most shocking. It's not only anti-Semitism, there was a planned Holocaust in Palestine. And I'm coming here, well, in the past 4 months, I'll mention it later, the Holocaust Museum just published a book, Nazi Palestine. It's a very shocking book, and I assume the book will be silenced. Nobody, it will not be reviewed, because the book brings documents by two German historians who are friends of also Jeff Herf, who worked with him, that there was a plan to do the Holocaust in Palestine. So the third message is, please distinguish between pan-Arab nationalism and between Islamism. The first message is Islamism, recent variety of anti-Semitism, dangerous. First message. Second message, distinguish between Islam and Islamism. Third message, distinguish between pan-Arabism and Islamism. And the fourth message is that please distinguish between anti-Semitism and Judaophobia. And I learned this distinction from a Jewish authority. At least for me, she's an authority. I know that after her, I mean Hannah Arendt, after her book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, she had problems in the Jewish community. But one of my Jewish colleagues in New York, Richard Bernstein, with whom I spent last December in Korea, and he gave me his book, Hannah Arendt and the Jewish Question, and he defends her. She was a good Jew. She was not a bad Jew. Yeah? One may disagree with her, but her famous work is The Origins of Totalitarianism. And in the preface, she says, quote unquote, anti-Semitism is much more than Jew hatred, of the quote. Judaophobia is a racism, it is an evil. But racists, like, for instance, racists who do not like Afro-Americans. They don't say all Afro-Americans should be killed. They say, I don't want to be close to an Afro-American. They are racist, they are vicious, they are ugly, but their thinking is not murderous, not genocidal. So the difference between Judaophobia is evil, the evil of racism, the evil of prejudice, and anti-Semitism is genocidal. Anti-Semites say Jews are evil, quote, and therefore they have to be exterminated. And this is the difference between Judaophobia and anti-Semitism. This difference is important for our subject matter. Yeah? I was most gratified, what I'll say it right now, there has been Judaophobia in Islam from the beginning. And I'm ashamed, it's an evil, I'm ashamed, I repeat it, it's an evil, but I was so pleased when Professor Milson, I liked your presentation yesterday, your documentation, I was frightened, to see all, but I know all what you said because I know the people, yeah? But now to see it again and to confront it, people speaking anti-Semitic language, was horrifying. But Professor Milson was so sound, like when he quoted of the Quran, and he said, this is not a general statement about the Jews. It is some group of Jews were compared with, and I don't want to go on with that. And he said it 2 or 3 times at least. This is not a general statement about the Jews. The Islamists make out this a general statement. So one of my teachers, I founded a discipline, Islamist. In the United States you have Islamic studies, and I study Islam as a social scientist and a political scientist and professor of international relations. And I study Islam not only as a faith, it is my faith. You have to know the faith, you have to know the religion, the culture, but I study it as politics, and Islam and politics, and Islam and conflict. And I call this, there was, during the East-West conflict, there was a discipline called Sovietology. Soviet Union, Sovietology is the study of East-West conflict. And I think one major conflict today, it is not clash of civilization. Please, I'll repeat it again, don't be mistaken, it's not clash of civilization, it's a conflict. Yeah? Clash and conflict are different issues. There is a conflict in world politics today, and Islam is at the center of this conflict. And the study of this conflict, I call it Islamology. So Islamology is a study of Islam and conflict in world politics. And one of my predecessors, the one I have learned most from this, is a French Jew, and he was the leading scholar of Islam in the past century. His name is Maxime Rodinson. And Maxime Rodinson, I have the honor of having most of his books with a personal, very close and emotional dedication. And Maxime Rodinson, he came from a Russian Jewish family that migrated to France, but he's born French. And he wrote a biography of the Prophet. This is the best book about early Islam. And he says the Quran is a book of chronicles, what happened there. So the relations of the Prophet Muhammad to the Jews was a mixed bag. Yeah? In the early days, he believed because Judaism and Islam are very similar, Jews will convert to Islam. And he was disappointed, so he was very friendly to them at the beginning. And then when they refused to convert, he became angry about them. So you have positive statement about the Jews in the Quran, and you have negative statements. And I will not go into this, but just to make in my authority of saying in early Islam there was no anti-Semitism, and my authority on this is the most prominent, still alive Jewish historian, Princeton University, Bernard Lewis, in his book The Jews of Islam. When President Sadat went to Israel and to reach out for peace, and he gave a historical speech in the Knesset in December 1977, and half of the speech was composed of quotes from the Quran. And he was not a student of the Quran, but the Sheikh of Al-Azhar collected the quotes for him. Yeah? And it was all positive, all the collected quotes, they were selectively taken. They are quotes which are 100% differently. Yeah? So when it's come to the Quran, you take what you want from it. And when he was praised for his speech, he said, and Golda Meir came out, and people say, I did not see that, but said Golda Meir was a hard lady, harder than Thatcher, Miss Thatcher, but she was crying, she was whipping, and took him in his arms and said, you want to make peace with us? He said, I quoted the Quran and I'm acting here as a Muslim. Yeah? And I'm here for human peace. You see, so the Quran is a book of chronicles, according to Maxime Rodinson. I would recommend this book strongly for you. So these are my 4 messages. So in the remainder of the time, I still have 11 or 12 minutes. Yeah? I shall elaborate on them, but one acknowledgement, two acknowledgements. The first acknowledgement is, well, I did it, but I repeated gratitude to my friend Charles Small, who promoted my work on anti-Semitism in spending 1 year here. He also published my paper, I hope you can get it, the YIISA paper on Islamization of anti-Semitism. Some of the ideas in the speech will be included in the paper. You can get it from him or from Laureen. Is wonderful lady. Without her, I think you cannot run the center. So this, and the second acknowledgement, and I'm very proud of that, I'm the first Muslim who goes to the Holocaust Museum. And I was there, I had 2 tenures there as the Rosnik Scholar for the study of anti-Semitism, 2008 and last summer. I spent the whole summer, 4 months, at the Holocaust Museum doing research on the Islamization of anti-Semitism. So many people ask me, you are a Muslim and you grew up in Damascus, and already when you are a kid, when I was in Damascus, you hear radio in the school, well, you have seen the documentary of Professor Wilson. Well, the things that you have seen in the documentary, this is things happen to me as well. In Damascus, say the Jews are our enemies, and Israel is Dawlat al-Isaba, it is not a state, it's a gangster union, etc. And how come you think like that, positive? I speak in public, and not now, long before Camp David, and that was highly risky and highly dangerous. I say, I acknowledge the right of the Jews to have their own state, to live in their sovereignty, to have sovereignty, and there must be a solution. The Holy Land must be shared between the Palestinians and Israel. Israel is there to stay. Israel has a right, legitimate right to stay, and the Israelis must find a solution that the Palestinians get their state as well, and both have to live in peace with one another. So people ask me, how come you think of that? And there's one person who's responsible for this, and this person is a Jew. And some people say, because I studied with this Jew, he brainwashed me. But I'm most grateful to this. He's a Holocaust survivor. His name is Max Horkheimer. I studied with Max Horkheimer. Some people don't believe it. Yes, I studied with him. I touched him. He and the other one, Theodor Adorno, both left Germany in 1933. But they felt as European, they felt okay in New York, but they said our home is Europe. And 1950, the wounds of Nazism were still open. The blood was, the earth was still soaked with Jewish blood, but they said, we want to go back home. And they went back home. I'm very glad they went back home, because without them, I wouldn't be what I am today. Yeah? Well, they came in 1950 back to Germany, but by then I was still 6 years old. By the age of 18, I went to Germany to study, and they were my teachers. I came to Germany in 1962. And Max Horkheimer, I learned from Max Horkheimer many things. I learned from Max Horkheimer first to understand what the Holocaust is all about. You cannot have it only by reading. And the second thing I learned from Horkheimer is enlightenment. You know, Horkheimer wrote a book, Dialektik der Aufklärung. They wrote it here in America, inside, he and Adorno, Dialectic of Enlightenment. And many people say, well, they haven't read the book, yeah? Like, many people speak about books without reading them, yeah? Like, I mean, Jeffrey Herf told me he was now attacked as making Israeli propaganda by a Palestinian professor named Khalidi, who have never seen this book, yeah? And so people say, Horkheimer and Adorno say, fascism, Nazism grew out of enlightenment. They never say that. Yeah? You have to read the book. They say there was a crisis, a social crisis, a political crisis, and within this crisis, something emanated from it that was fascism. And so fascism, there's a link between enlightenment and fascism. But that doesn't mean, this is the nuances, this is the wonderful thing in scholarship, there's no black and white. So fascism grew up in a crisis situation that was Weimar Germany from enlightenment. So there is something in enlightenment which promoted fascism, but enlightenment is not fascism. And the same Islamism grew out from Islam. Islamism is not anti-Islamic. Like I was a founding member of the Center for the Study of Radicalization in the United Kingdom, and at the time, it was 3 years ago, when the Labour Party was still in power, and the Home Security Secretary was a lady, Jackie Smith, and she didn't want to offend Muslims. And she said, we talk about terrorism, like Mr. Brannan, who's advising Obama. Yeah? Say, we don't talk about Islamism, we don't talk about Islam, we don't talk about jihadism. And she said, Islamism is anti-Islamic. Yeah? I said, what are you talking about? So, like if you say Hitler was anti-German. Yeah? But Germany is, you cannot identify Germany with Nazism. I mean, you have to see distinctions, nuances, and so I learned enlightenment, encountering enlightenment with the assistance of Horkheimer was very, very important for me. And the third thing I learned from, well, these two things, to understand the Holocaust and enlightenment. I learned that when I started studying with Horkheimer. But at that time, I remember that was the Vietnam War, and I was a Marxist, but today I've returned to Islam. Today I'm a liberal Muslim, but at the time I was a Marxist and under the impact of Horkheimer. And there was the Vietnam War, and we were protesting against the Vietnam War, and we were tiers-mondistes in French. We said third-worldist, and Horkheimer refused to support us. He said, I support you against the war, but I cannot support your romanticism for the Viet Cong. Yeah? And I today, 40 years later, I understand what his message. And last year, I published an article in a left-wing journal here in the United States. Tell us. And the article is the legacy of Max Horkheimer and Islamism. And I show that Max Horkheimer warned us by then. He warned us of third worldism, of the pitfalls of third worldism. And Jeffrey Herf, in his presentation, said many times, today, the left wing in America and in Europe, the same, they legitimate anti-Semitism as a third worldism. They say this is not about Jew hatred, this is about grievance. And this term was a few weeks ago, even in the New York Times. I thought I'm not reading well, but I read it 3 times and I asked my wife, are my eyes okay? Am my brain okay? They say anti-Semitism. This is not anti-Semitism. Hamas and all these people. This is frustrated. Try to get quote unquote frustrated expressions of politically and socially legitimate grievances. End of the quote. So this is third worldism. Today I'm aware of this. Now, the distinction between Islam and Islamism is very important. We Muslims, we have to deal with our past, and we liberal Muslims, and we have also to deal with Judaophobia, which existed throughout Islamic history, even though not always. There were, in Islamic Spain, Maimonides, the most important personality in Jewish cultural history is Maimonides. I do not claim that, but my Jewish friend in Israel tell me that, and I'm very happy to hear the message, because Maimonides and Averroes in Arabic, Ibn Rushd, they were the top persons. One for Islamic rationalism and one for Jewish rationalism, being compatible with one another. And so, and Bernard Lewis even speaks of a Jewish Islamic symbiosis in Islamic Spain. But still, there was a Judaism, and the Jews were ranked as dhimmis, second-class citizen. This is not acceptable today. We have to deal with Judaophobia, and I'm a Reform Muslim. Reform Islam means to read also the Quran critically, as Christians read the Bible critically. And that's why my major book was published last year, Islam's Predicament with Modernity, and the subtitle is Religious Reform and Cultural Change. And I argue this is what we need, religious reform and cultural change. We do not say this is from God and you take it without any further reasoning. Say, I do not accept that. For instance, I mean, now to go beyond the Jews, the Quran says if your wife does not comply with you, you give her a warning. First step. If the warning doesn't help, you deny her sexuality. The Quran says, فَهْجُرْهُمَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ.
So leave her alone in the bedroom. And if it doesn't help, the third step is فَضْرِبُوهُنَّ, beat them. My wife is here, and she can acknowledge I've never been. That means I'm not complying with Quranic commandment, and so therefore I try to read the Quran critically and to deal with the Judaophobia. This is a theological function, and I'm not alone. There are other Muslims like my friend Al-Jabiri in Morocco, Sayyid Ashmawi in Egypt. I mean, we are a group, but not that some of us are in the diaspora because we are safer in the diaspora, but some of us are more courageous than I am, and they do that at home, yeah? In Egypt, in Morocco, and the best place for Reform Islam is Indonesia. I lived in Indonesia. I was also the advisor. One of my co-religionists who's like-minded became the president of Indonesia, President Wahid, who passed away last December. So in Indonesia, when I was teaching at the Islamic University of Indonesia, I was able there to speak as I'm speaking here. But so dealing with Judaophobia is a theological question, yeah? But dealing with anti-Semitism is a political question, because Islamism is a political Islam. And at issue is religionized politics. I made a verb of religion, religionized politics, and Islamists have a religious agenda, and then you have to deal with them religiously. So Islam is a faith, Islam is a cult. How do I pray? How do I organize my life? Islam is three things. Islam is a cult, is a faith, and it's a cultural system, but it is never about politics. The term politics never occurred in the Quran, siyasa. The term dawla, the major idea of the Islamists is the Islamic State. The dawla never occurs in the Quran. And they say Sharia is the path of Islam. There is only one phrase in the Quran about Sharia and no second. This is in Surah Al-Jathiyah. I am a Hafiz, I know the Quran by heart. It says, وَثُمَّ جَعَلْنَاكَ مِنْهَا شَرِيعَةٌ بِالْأَرْضِ فَاتَّبِعُوهَا. We have given you a source of conduct, so live after it. So how, I'm not supposed to lie, I'm not supposed to steal, I have to be straightforward. This is Sharia. Sharia is not state law, as the Islamists argue. So Islamism is invention of tradition. Islamism is not anti-Islamic, it is not un-Islamic, it grows from Islam, it is an interpretation of Islam, it is very arbitrary interpretation of Islam in a crisis situation. And in this crisis situation, Islam becomes an Islamism. And Islamism is not about violence. It is more serious than that. Islamism, I see the time is running. Can I have more 3 minutes? But just to pass this message, and maybe in the rest, Islamism, if you say, what is the definition of Islamism? Well, I make it like an anecdote. I was among five professors who consulted the American armed forces prior to the war of Iraq. All 5 of us told the American military in the Naval War College, do not go to war in Iraq, that would be supportive to Islamism. Yeah? But this is not the issue. The issue is that one general asked me, Professor Tibi, I do not have time to read your book about political Islam. And I am not an intellectual, I do not read books. He was very honest. Yeah? If you are a good scholar, if you're a good teacher, you tell me in 2 phrases, in 1 to 2 minutes, how can I distinguish between a Muslim and an Islamist? And then you ask this Muslim, is Islam deen, iman? Is Islam religion, a faith? Or Islam is deen wa dawla? Islam is a combination of state order based on religion. And if he says Islam is a political order, then he's an Islamist. Islamists want to remake the world. The first step in the agenda of Islamism is to establish the Islamic Sharia state. In Islamic faith, there is no such thing. Islam is based on 5 pillars, Arkan al-Khamsa. To say God, there's only one God and Prophet is the messenger. To pray, to pay money for the poor, zakat, to fast in Ramadan, and if you have the money to make the Hajj. There's no Sharia state, no politics, nothing. So the Islamists, they argue, they want to have the Islamic Sharia state against the nation state, and the next step is the world order, to replace the existing Westphalian order of states by an Islamic world order. And now you ask me where's anti-Semitism, and I explain it to you, and I stop because I said really only 3 minutes. The difference between pan-Arab anti-Semitism and Islamist anti-Semitism is this. Pan-Arab anti-Islamists, some of them are Christians. The first one was his name Najib Azzouri. He wrote a book in French, Le Réveil de la Nation Arabe, the revival of the Arab nation. And he rephrases French anti-Semitism 100%, and he acknowledges the import. So anti-Semitism and import from Europe, and the Arab nationalists, they say we adopted the idea of the nation from Europe, and we acknowledge the source, and they rephrase it. And the Islamists, they say we refused anything from the West. Anything from, coming from the West is istirab, is import, and no import. We insist on the authenticity, and they go for purification. Purification and authenticity. So Islam is clean Islam, nothing from Europe, nothing from the Jews, nothing from the Crusaders. And so Islamist anti-Semitism is based on authenticity, but it is an import. And the only thing they acknowledge, they quote the protocols of the Elder of Zion. If you read the Charter of Hamas, you will find it there. If you read Sayyid Qutb, you will find it there. So they argue the Jews want to establish a Jewish world order, and they adopt this from the protocol. And so we want to establish an Islamic world order. So our enemy are not the Americans, are not the Europeans. Our enemies are the Jews, because there are two agendas for replacing the existing world order, and one is Islamic and one Jew, and therefore there is an eternal war between Jews and Muslims. It has nothing to do with Palestine. I'm glad Professor Melson brought yesterday some documentaries. One of them said, وَحَتَّى لَوْ أَرْجَعُوا لَنَا فِلَسْطِينَ لَنَا تَوْقَفْ عَنْ كُرْهُمْ. Even if they gave us Palestine back, we will not stop hating them. And why? Because they want to have their world order, and we deny them the Jewish world order, because this is a threat to our agenda of an Islamic world order. And this is what Islamism is all about. It is about order. And the difference between, there are two schools of Islamists. One of them, or two directions. One is the peaceful, now celebrated in Washington, unfortunately even by the Obama administration. They call the moderate Islamists. Among them are the Muslim Brothers. These forego violence and accept working in institutions. And these are the peaceful Islamists, but they do not abandon the goal. And the jihadist Islamists are violent, but violence is not a goal in itself. Violence is only the means. And so violence is only a side aspect of Islamism. So when you talk about Islamism and Islamic anti-Semitism, do not focus on violence. This is a destruction. Make distinction between pan-Arabism and Islamism. Make distinction between Islam and Islamism, and look at Islamism as an agenda for remaking the world. And in the understanding of the Islamists, they are in competition with the Jews, and that's why they hate them. And they look at the Jews as the evil, and this is the difference between, and this is the last thing, the difference between Islamic traditional Judaophobia and Islamist anti-Semitism. The traditional Islamic Jew hatred is resentment, is racism. This is an evil, but it is not genocidal. The Islamist anti-Semitism is genocidal because they say the Jews have to be wiped out. And the model is Nazi Germany. Hassan al-Banna, who is very careful about making positive statements about non-Muslim sources, he was positive about Hitler, and Professor Herf quotes him. He found the document, it was amazing. He says, Hitler didn't make it, but we made it. Yeah? So this is, is this grievance? Is this grievance about articulation of grievance about injustice? No, it is not. And as a Muslim humanist, I stand up to the Jews, and my mother is Max Horkheimer, and I say, Jews are like us, Jews are equals, we are not the means, and we have to live together, and we have to fight We have to delegitimate Islamism, and we have to find ways for living with one another and to re-establish a Jewish-Islamic symbiosis, not like in the past. In the past, it was between superior Muslims and the Dhimmis, but as citizens, equals, Jewish citizens and Muslim citizens. And I travel regularly to Israel, and I repeat my commitment to the State of Israel and the legitimacy of the State of Israel. And liberal Muslims must take this as a very important issue. Thank you.
Very quickly, Professor Tibi, thank you very much for your scholarship, your wisdom, and your humility, and your bravery. Thank you for being here.